I'm a student here at Zaytuna, and previously I have a degree in medicine, allopathic medicine, from Pakistan. My question to you is, our modern diet, what effect does that have on the temperaments, on the humors of the body, specifically like fatty foods and sugar? Does it has it caused an effect in your estimation on society as a whole? And then my second question is, you mentioned foods that shouldn't be mixed with each other. If you could just mention a few of those examples. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, mashallah. Modern foods really, like I said with respect to the idea of organic, most modern foods are grown in a soil that's depleted. And it's full of rubbish, i.e. poisons. When they grow the crops, they then spray them with more poisons, and so on and so forth. And then the processing of the food, and then additives. Most additives are harmful and they're also addictive. So really, at the moment, the biggest cause for disease is the food and the drinks that people are consuming. And it is not only changing people's temperaments, I believe, but really these things are changing people's body shapes. If you look at people who consume junk food, their bodies become distorted. But one has to go to societies, very few that are left, who are not eating wholesale junk food, to see that difference. And really, on another level, they are changing people's emotional responses. And I believe they're altering and affecting people's, they're becoming blocks to people's spiritual development. And finally, I think some of these foods, especially the genetically modified foods, are actually creating confusion about people's gender identities and crime and behavior problems. And again, people who are doing research in our times, a lot of this information is known, but it's not given to the public. So there is a relationship between food and people's spirituality, relationship between foods and drinks and people's emotion, intellect, their behavior, and their identities. And if we go back to the metaphor and the story about our own situation in the paradise, when God said to Adam and Eve, live in this paradise, do whatever you like, but don't go near this particular tree. Whatever the tree was, they were not to take its fruit. Allah said, don't even go near it. But over time, through the whispering of shaitan, they got tempted into tasting that. And it's very clear that really tasting of whatever, whether it was wheat or apple, depending on which tradition, it dramatically affected their spirituality. And to the extent that it affected their physical aspects. Now this was known to obviously shaitan. That's why he lured them into this trap. And today, if you look at the mass production of the food and how it's produced and how it's kind of promoted and what are the things which are sold, one can see that. And on a very small level, those of you who are parents, you can see that your children, when they consume certain drinks or certain foods, they become hyper. So if it affects them in this way, then it's also affecting them in other deeper levels. The second point about food combinations, again, when we go back to the Prophet ﷺ's, their own lives, there's very clear evidence and practices that they did not use to mix certain foods, and they used to encourage mixing of other foods. So for example, when they ate dates, they would combine that with cucumber as an example. Dates, in terms of their energetics, are usually hot or hot and dry. Cucumber is seen as cool and moist. So by mixing these two, it moderates the heat of the other. So it balances the food. Again, there are some foods which create, they call it facade in the digestive system, and it's well known that mixing certain foods, for example, mixing different type of meats, mixing fish and meat, mixing milk and sour foods, leads to many, many health problems. Today, again, if you look at how foods are sold and produced, there's all sorts of mixtures that doesn't take any of this knowledge or wisdom into account. So people get illnesses of all sorts of different illnesses. So balancing the food and certain ways of mixing the foods are important, really.